All right, we're live. Hey, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm with Casey Phillips today. Casey Phillips is a product manager currently at eBay, working on generative AI products and features. And he's been doing this for over 10 years at this point, mostly working on AI stuff at some of the largest companies, including Uber and Intuit. So some of you might be wondering, why do we have a product manager on the show today when normally we're hosting designers? And the reason is there actually aren't that many designers working on AI first products right now. And if you look around at some of the products or AI products that are currently on the market, most of them don't actually have a designer on staff for any number of reasons. And this is why I think it's so important that we get the perspective of product managers because they're typically often the first person on the team aside from the engineers, and they work closely with designers, and they also have a lot of say in when a designer is brought on staff. In addition, they would also interview the designer. So getting their perspective, understanding how they think about the role of design and how design fits into the AI product itself could be immensely useful in your role as a designer trying to switch onto an AI feature team, or if you're interviewing right now for your first AI design job. So, yeah, Casey, how are you doing today?
Doing well. It's a good Monday morning so far.
Yeah, it's still morning for you. Okay, it's afternoon for us on the East Coast, but let's just dive right into it. Can you tell us about some of the products you've worked on in the AI space involving designers, ideally?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've worked on a variety of product experiences, most extensively more so on like conversational AI experiences. So that'd be like chatbots or like voice assistants. I've also worked on some like recommendation type of products. I've done a little bit of work on search, but not quite as much. And then as well for my time at Uber, I worked on like just more so a lot of like backend, like machine learning optimizations that sometimes don't even have design components as well. But in terms of the experience standpoint, like most of it's been more so on the conversational experiences and then designing like recommendation types of products, like whether that's recommending e-commerce items to users or potentially like recommending like self-help content.
Very cool. And can you talk a bit about any of the features or products you've worked on in the AI space that didn't have designers?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say I've been really fortunate that most of the experiences I've worked on that actually have some type of like UI UX component to I have been fortunate to actually have design resources. Thankfully, we're not trying to, kind of to kind of like guess what the user experience should be. But some of the products that I have worked on that have not had designers, even more so like working on like machine learning optimization. So, for example, when I worked at Uber, a lot of times just coming up with like backend ML optimizations of finding the right driver to match with the right rider. Those are always going to have a designer needed because we're not really doing anything differently in the UI UX. You're just improving the outcome of a match. You could have the same type of thing as well. Like if you're working as a product manager, as well, like even some of the recommendation systems that I've worked on as well. Like if you're not the product manager who is leading that recommendation system from 0 to 1, if you're maybe taking over that recommendation system like later on, like I have in some roles, you may not always need an actual designer because you may just be making tweaks in the back end to improve the quality of the recommendations, but there may not be a difference in terms of how that's presented in the UI UX. So that's a couple of examples of some projects I've worked on that there hasn't been quite as much need for an active dedicated designer.
Cool. And when you're working on these teams, do you have an idea of why they put a designer on? Like or rather, who is deciding if there's going to be a designer on this team or not?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think generally speaking, that usually comes with alignment, like a little bit higher up in alignment, in particular with like design and product leadership, and kind of determining what tracks of work design resources should be allocated to. So I think in a perfect ideal state, you should have alignment between the product leadership and that design on where those design resources should go. And as a product manager, if I'm working on an product that's strong UI UX component, or there's a lot of value that we can get from the AI with UI UX, which I feel like is most of the time the case, then as a product manager, I would hope that there's the proper alignment on the leadership level. That I have at least a dedicated designer, or at the very least, um, a very easy dotted line access to potentially like a shared design resource like I've had in the past.
I see. So is a designer typically on the team already when you're joining, or do they join a little bit after you?
Um, That's a good question. So I would say a lot of times the designers have already been on the teams after I joined. And from my experience as well, like I haven't worked with a lot of instances where designers have been dedicated like solely to actual AI products and features. A lot of the designers I work with, um, they've I've seen them like bounce around between like a different product experiences. Some product experiences that are more so like traditional, using that rule-based logic and maybe not as machine learning focused, but then also work in the machine learning. So from my experience, usually it's just been a designer ends up a lot of times getting allocated, not hiring a dedicated AI designer. Usually be someone maybe they'll transition from another track of work. Maybe they're even working on like another AI product and they'll end up getting allocated to one of my projects.
I see. Got it. So what do you think would be the biggest value that this designer is providing for you on your projects?
Oh, I mean, there's a ton of value. I think having a dedicated designer on the AI the AI projects is really valuable because I think as a product manager, it's an opportunity to really like collaborate with a design resource as well. And I think that that can that that can be really critical in coming up with the ideal product roadmap and the right product strategy. I think as a product manager, the more different like trains of thought that you can lean on with your products, I think the better the outcome is going to be. So having that dedicated designer who can own what the UI UX should be, and be able to marry that with the product vision and the product strategy. But even beyond that, like I would really expect and hope that I have a really strong design resource that I can collaborate with on determining what the ideal product strategy and the ideal product roadmap would be and taking their feedback, because perhaps there's something that as a product manager that I'm envisioning from a machine learning standpoint, but maybe the designer has a point on what the users truly need, and they may push back on the prioritization of something or push back on just the overall like idea or the overall strategy of a product. And it can be really helpful to get that unique viewpoint from the designers and collaborate with them.
Cool. Sounds like a pretty good partnership versus the oftentimes more of a cascading waterfall process of here's what we need you to design and create on the design side. So you
Yeah.
mentioned a strong designer. What do you mean by that exactly? Like, how do you define a designer who is strong when you're working on AI first products?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, from my standpoint, like I personally think that any strong designer can excel in AI. Like I've worked with a lot of designers who have worked on more so like traditional products, as I mentioned, where it's more so like rule based, and you're not dealing with like the overall like variability and unknowns of something that's machine learning and AI based. And I've worked with designers that have transitioned and they've done an exceptional job. For me, like a few of the key things that I would be looking for that I think would really make a designer a strong AI designer. I think the number one thing for me would just be like overall like passion and like intellectual curiosity about what's going on in the AI space. I think if you are a designer and you're passionate with the AI space, if you're using the tools like ChatGPT and stuff like that, then that's going to really, really help, because if you're using these tools and putting yourself in the perspective as a user, I think that you're going to start to acknowledge and realize just like the magnitude of the potential like pain points and the potential like edge cases that users could encounter. And I think that's going to help a lot as a designer when you're actually going and executing on the work and doing that design. So I think the number one thing for me would just be again that intellectual curiosity and that experience where like in your free time even you're constantly using AI tools and keeping up the speed on it. Another Another quality that I feel like as well is really helpful for designers to work in the AI space is just a very thorough attention to detail. I think when you're dealing with a lot of like AI products, because you're dealing with outcomes that are coming from machine learning, there's a lot more unknowns and there's a lot less predictability in the outcomes that can come. When you're dealing with like a standard product that's just more so based on rule-based logic, myself and a designer, we could probably sit down and over the course of a few hours, like map out all the potential flows and all the different use cases and scenarios that users could go through. That's just not feasible with a lot of these AI products, especially when you're thinking the context of a lot of like the newer AI products, when you deal with like generative AI and like large language models. There's no way that you could map out every single question that users could ask and every single way the large language model could respond or every potential bad scenario state that could happen. So I think having a designer that has that attention to detail and is able to kind of like identify some of those like edge cases and unknowns that would be more so problematic, helpful. And then hopefully, I can partner with that designer and we can incorporate into the product roadmap actually like addressing some of those problematic use cases that users could get into before they happen. You always want to try and see if you can like proactively address it before you release it versus releasing an AI tool and then having to reactively address a lot of problematic experiences that users are getting into.
Got it. Got it. So, as a designer, when we're talking about mapping out all the permutations, all the scenarios, we might be using mapping tools like Miro or even FigJam or, any other mapping tools out there. And then we would steadily increase the fidelity of the outcomes. And eventually we will create wireframes and visual designs that highlight or draws out the individual scenarios that people might come across. How might that be different for AI first products?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, to me, I think the biggest difference is just really in the overall like volume of like use cases that you could potentially have to map out and actually address. Like even as I mentioned before, like for example, if we are designing something that's maybe like not AI driven, like if we were designing, just like a login screen or something, I think it'd be very easy to just go ahead and like map out all use cases, even like the edge cases that users could go into. If a user like forgets their passwords, and you could think ahead and map all of that. But when you're dealing with a lot like AI systems, especially AI systems that are using machine learning on the back end, the the number of variables and the number of like unknown situations that could come up, it increases exponentially. Like it feels like, especially if you want to talk about design from like a conversational aspect as well, like the conversational content, it's essentially infinite now. It's like large language. No way that you could design like a use case and flow for every single question or intent that user could have and every single answer. Even if you try to, it, it wouldn't provide any value because you don't know exactly how the large language model is going to respond. And sometimes even as well, like two two different users could ask the same exact question, and that doesn't mean that the large language model is going to generate the same exact response. So I think in terms of to like answer your question, I think it's just a lot more like partnership and a lot more like prioritization between the product manager and the designer to be able to look at what can feel like never end or like use case flows that you could have and kind of determine what's the most important and what do we like really need to ensure that we have like the right guardrails in place on or where like the experience feel that we need to absolutely nail and make sure that you can prioritize those and as well. And then you're gonna kind of like uncomfortable feeling where like the rest of that you just kind of need to the mercy of in the machine learning that you have or believing with the large language model they have. And then after launch, like looking at the data, actually like other edge cases or problem scenarios that you maybe were not able to proactively identify. and then kind of like reactively address those. So I think it's just, in my opinion, in short, it's just the volume of potential use cases that you can map out. It's a lot more, and it can get overwhelming. I think you just need a really strong PM and designer partnership, and just do a really good job of prioritizing.
At the risk of getting too granular, does the tools that you use differ when it comes to mapping out all these different permutations? Because it can get very large. Like, do you still use the same FigJam Miro boards, and Figma prototypes are, is it a little bit different or more theoretical?
Yeah, it's a good question. So you for anything that's important, like we always have designed a mock-up for it, and it's in Figma. So Figma's primarily been the design tool that I've used in partnership with designers. I will get some files for some of these, especially an AI assistant that I've worked on now and in the past. They can get incredibly massive, where like you're looking at like like 50 different like pages within the Figma, and like a certain page has like several different ones. So it can definitely be it can definitely like be a very like overwhelming Figma. I think just as a product manager, it's a lot of onus for me to spend a lot of time with the overall designers, just even like understanding like where everything is in the Figma, and coming up with like a naming and like an organization to the Figma, so that way myself and other stakeholders, we can be able to find the right flow within that Figma with relative ease. So I think it definitely puts a lot more onus when using the Figma tool to make sure that you're organizing it well, because it will likely get very massive. And you are on mute.
I'm a complete amateur. I apologize. This
You're
is
fine.
not the first time I've done this. Um, yeah, I was saying, at the risk of assuming too much, it sounds a bit like, because you cannot possibly map out all the different permutations out there compared to more traditional non-AI products where here are the error states that engineers can give you. For AI tools, is it more reactive? Like, you're kind of mapping out the best case scenarios, and then you might have a few guardrails in place, some few known guardrails in place, like hallucinations, or you have bad actors, etc. But overall, it's kind of, you don't know what's going to happen, and you're kind of waiting for some data to be collected, and then you'll design for it as it crops up. Is it kind of like that, or am I off base here?
No, you're actually spot on. That's 100% correct. And I think anyone that's worked on a lot of AI products would tell you that that's generally like the best approach to take, and actually like designing and developing AI products. Again, like there's so much variability, not just in terms of how users will actually use the AI product and tool, especially if it's like a conversation tool that's using a large language model. Then you also have the variability, and you don't know how that large language model is going to respond. So the best way that you can iterate on that is to really come up with like very like actions, and then use actual like user data to like validate where you should go. I would say like if you're working on an AI, you're just heads down developing for like 6 months without getting any user data, that can definitely be really terrifying, because there's a very strong likelihood that you could end up having very false assumptions. False assumptions probably more likely in terms of how users will actually use the AI tools. So I think, generally speaking, um, for the most part, the product development lifecycle for AI products lends itself much better to trying to figure out like what are the minimal I feel like we absolutely have to handle, and sometimes you may have to handle it from like a legal standpoint. Also, if you're working with a brand, you want to make sure that you're not having any edge cases come up that could be problematic to your brand. Like, for example, if you're dealing with like large language models, like what if a user asks your assistant, and you're working for like a large, well-known brand, what if it asks them like where to find like magic mushrooms, and like the agent were to tell them that, that could be really problematic, because it could get the company and the legal entity, its brand, in legal trouble. There's also a good chance that the user could like take a screenshot and put it on Reddit and like, look, like this company's chatbot helped me find a website where I could buy like illegal psychedelic mushrooms or something. You don't want that type of scenario to happen. So you want to try and figure out like what are the bare minimum of those scenarios that we have to happen, that we have to solve, and then let the user data kind of dictate a lot of those other scenarios. Otherwise, I feel like you will just end up in such long, drawn out development cycles and making so many assumptions that a lot of them will end up getting proven false, and then you have to potentially like work backwards and make changes to what you've already.
I see. So there's a lot of building stuff as quickly as possible and seeing how users react to it because this is a very new technology or set of user interactions compared to traditional interactions. Is there a role for generative research when it comes to building these kind of new AI features?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is, and I think you can try to do like research upfront. Like I worked at companies where there has been user research, of like figuring out, as a user, like how would you potentially use like a digital assistant or a voice assistant in this use case. I think there's definitely some research that you can try and do upfront, especially in terms of trying to align what you're building to the user's value propositions. With that being said, though, like I don't think that's going to completely solve like what we just talked about before. Like for example, like if a user envisioned using an AI tool that you developed that was maybe using a large language model, if they envisioned using that for like problematic use cases, like if they wanted to try and like inject some prompt that could allow them to like maybe get the AI assistant to like mimic the role of someone else and maybe like perform like an illegal activity or collect another user's sensitive information. If they try to like the override that large language model functionality, which a lot of times is possible, I don't think that you would get something like that from research. Especially like if you're doing user research and user interviews. With that being said, like, I think there is value in having a team. I think you're seeing, especially that a lot of larger organizations that are especially integrating with the generative AI tools and large language models, they're always having like a responsible AI team that really owns like figuring out like what are the scenarios that are the most problematic and the most problematic behavior that users can engage in, and ensuring that the product and designers are accounting for those. So I think like that team in particular, like a really strong, responsible AI team that's like just getting a feel for what's going on in the industry, maybe seeing, oh, like, one of our competitors or another large companies, their large language based tool was just hacked in such and such way. And then they're able to understand, okay, like, well, that could happen to us. Now we need to actually solve this. I think that's a component, having a really strong, responsible AI team.
Got it. So it sounds like a lot of the learnings are being applied via watching how other people screw up and make mistakes in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, definitely an extent, and honestly, too, like you're definitely going to screw up as well when you launch your own. So I think obviously, like you want to before you launch, learn from the mistakes that others have made, especially if you're maybe lagging a little bit. But as well, like I'm sure like you're going to make your own mistakes or maybe have that are unique to your particular use case of AI that other companies may not. But absolutely, like if you can learn from others' mistakes beforehand, you absolutely should.
Do you see, well, part of the reason, I feel like part of the reason why we can learn from other companies' mistakes when it comes to generative AI is because overall, all the things that we're building are quite similar. And therefore, the exploits stretch across the platforms pretty easily.
Mhm.
Do you see us perhaps branching off at one point when it comes to building AI first products? Because right now it seems fairly similar across the board when it comes to using chat.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think like it seems similar in a lot of use cases, but it may not actually be in the back end. Like I think what you're seeing is a lot of like the larger companies that in particular are leveraging generative AI and particularly large language models. They're not just going to throw, they're not just going to throw like a chatbot into their product that uses, for example, like the GPT 3.5 large language model. You could do that, but like, what's the value? I mean, to be honest, like, what's the value to the user of your product versus them just going and actually using ChatGPT themselves? There would honestly be zero value if you did that. Where companies get value is through a few ways. Like you can fine tune that large language model to like your own to a data set that is very centric to the domain that you're in. So for example, if you're in e-commerce, you could fine tune it to a data set that is, on like particular like questions and answers that users may be looking for related to e-commerce. That's just one example. So if you were to do that and do that fine tuning, now you have essentially like a different model than another company because you fine tune it to your data. Another thing that you're seeing as well is that a lot of the larger companies who are doing things with large language models and chatbots, they're finding ways to infuse the actual like user data and data from their platform into the large language model. That's like this is, I don't know if anyone's heard of it. It's called like retrieval augmented generation. Huge word, RAG's the abbreviation, but it's essentially funneling in users' actual data and funneling in data points that usually get like a vector database. I'm getting way too technical right now, but it's essentially ingesting really relevant data into the user responses that the large language model can use to provide even like higher accuracy relevant responses. So company, if you are using that approach, you could potentially have like certain like problems or scenarios come up that may be unique to your implementation of infusing that data into the large language model. So I would argue from like a distance and at face value, it may seem like every company is doing the same thing, but I think if they're trying to truly get value out of their large language model, they're likely doing some sort of like fine tuning or like infusing their own data into that large language model, which could inherently create their own unique set of problems.
Got it. So you mentioned that companies, I mean, it's really important that companies need to understand the value that it's creating for the users when they're injecting AI features into their existing tools and products. And I definitely have noticed that companies seems to fall under two buckets. You have companies that seems like they just want to throw AI into their current products at any cost. And I'll just throw out an example. I would say LinkedIn is an example because there are all these AI features on LinkedIn that I absolutely do not want to use. I don't see any how I can create any value for anyone, like using AI to write comments or write entire posts, or using AI for collaborative articles. Like I don't see the point in that at all. I don't see how it's creating value for anyone. It's all just like empty engagement in many ways. And then you have other bucket of companies that are using AI in much more savvy or productive ways. How do you like what's the difference between these two companies? Like I know you can't talk about your work at eBay right now, but just from the outside looking in, seeing other companies out there, do you see a pattern in terms of how companies end up in one of these two buckets, or is it kind of random?
Um, yeah, that's a good question. I think to be honest with you, probably a lot of it just comes from like how how product works at the company. So obviously, I can't speak to the kind of LinkedIn use case and exactly why, as you mentioned, that they're developing some of the AI-driven product and features as a user. You're looking at like this, where's the value of this? How does this tie into like the overall value proposition of the overall LinkedIn product? Um, but I have a feeling that with a lot of companies, especially that are doing a really good job right now, carrying the AI tools that they're developing to the user value, a lot of it is like they've probably learned lessons in the past. I mean, AI has been around for a while now. I think that you're getting to the state where there's been enough instances just overall in the tech, overall in the overall technology landscape. I think we've all seen examples of companies that have invested heavily in AI use cases that just completely missed the mark and didn't provide a ton of like the metaverse is potentially one. I mean, maybe some people here love the metaverse. I completely. I mean, I kind of understood the metaverse when it came out, but I felt like it was just not the right timing, and that it was way too soon for the type of user adoption that would justify that kind of investment. But obviously, that's just my viewpoint being external to Meta. So I think there's just been enough kind of horror stories in the market where companies have wasted a lot of money just building AI without marrying it to like their overall vision of their product, and like really ensuring that you're designing something for the users first in mind and delivering value for them. And as well, like I'm sure there's companies that they've learned that lesson on their own. I'm sure like every have like a closet, like a skeleton closet of some projects that they've worked on in the past that they invested heavily in and did not provide a lot of value. So you end up like learning and growing from that. Obviously, you just provide some examples where that doesn't mean it's perfect, and it doesn't mean that there are not going to be companies now that are going to try and throw, especially generative AI products without looking at. But I think just in general, the realness that's been observed over the years with releasing AI products and just the heavy costs that come with them and the resource investment, I think you're seeing a lot more companies now, at least I feel, are getting more so in that bucket of like trying to be more responsible of introducing AI to the product to make sure that they get an investment and they're not adding another project to that skeleton closet.
I see. So it sounds like if they have the experience and the product team that allows them to create user focused features as opposed to just kind of crank it out and just say we have AI or we have VR now. Um, let's say hypothetically you are looking for a job again today, ideally to work on AI again. How would you identify the companies that are going to be AI forward thinking versus one that's just throwing AI into a single feature and letting it die very quickly on the vine?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think for me, like one thing I would look at is a company that, like, first off, is ensuring that they're equipping themselves with the right like resources. So like I want to see that like there's like product leadership and engineering leadership that has experience in particular working directly with AI. And I think as well, like in my answer to the previous question, I think if you have enough stakeholders working in AI that have that experience of several years, they've likely made a lot of those mistakes already, and they do not want to make them again. I think that you will probably see just like a lot better outcomes. I think you also just see like better like organization within the company. So I think like that'd be one of the very first things I would look for, is just trying to get a sense of like, and obviously it's easier said than done, but I would try and put some feelers and get a sense for like how is AI structured here? Like, do you have engineering and kind of product leadership that's really focused on AI and has that experience working in AI would be a huge thing that I would look for. And as well, just a company that, this isn't their very first go around with AI. It would definitely be at least a yellow flag, if not a red flag for me, if I got a sense for like the company was like standing AI team for the very first time, because I would imagine like that company and in particular the AI team is going to be a lot of headaches and just like a lot of inefficiencies and a lot of mistakes made initially. And from my standpoint, where I'm at in my career, I'd like to have avoid being thrown into that type of situation. So those are some things that I would start to kind of look at and then get more granular from there.
Got it. So when I was interviewing for roles that were working on AI stuff, I typically ask people, how many data scientists do you have on staff
Mm.
for this feature? Do you think that's an effective question? And or is there a better question that could help you highlight the strength of the team?
Um, Asking the number of data scientists is definitely helpful, because obviously like the data scientists are really I mean they're kind of like the kind of like fuel essentially to building anything with AI. Like you need those data scientists to be able to actually stand up and build the modeling and the capabilities. So it's definitely important. But to me, I wouldn't say just because a team has a lot of data scientists wouldn't necessarily indicate to me that they're poised to effectively build AI products. It means that they have the scientists who can create the models, but there's so much more to it that we talked about. There's, being able to marry what being able to marry your AI capabilities with like the user value and like a product vision. So that really comes into like having the right like product design, even like engineering, like leadership that understands AI as well. So I think like that's definitely like that can definitely be like a decent proxy for whether a team company is poised to actually deliver AI tools and products. But I don't think it would necessarily guarantee that that's going to be done in the right manner and that you're going to have good results.
I think that makes sense. I was worried that my question was kind of half-assed. Uh, it
Yeah,
sounds
that's
like
good.
you it sounds like we're touching on the concept of possibly AI maturity at companies.
Mhm.
Or I mean, I think, you as a product manager and me as a designer, we tend to come across that at companies in terms of product org maturity or design org maturity. And for me as a designer, it's really important that I make sure any companies I work at, they have somewhat of a, high maturity. And if not, there are plans or there's resources and investment to get us at a higher level. Do you think there's something like that for AI as well?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And kind of in terms of, I guess what my take would be on kind of like AI maturity and where companies are at. I think there's obviously like there's multiple components I think that could go into AI maturity. Um, a few of the ones, like one is obviously like the overall like product strategy and the vision and making sure that you're marrying the AI that you're building to actual like to a user centric focus and solving problems for users, delivering value for the users. We've kind of talked about that. I feel like that aspect of AI maturity is getting a lot better just because there's been enough horror stories and companies do not want any more. They don't want as many massive failed AI projects. So I feel like that aspect of AI maturity is definitely getting a lot better and one of the more mature aspects. There's also like the resourcing standpoint to AI maturity as well. So I think another way that I would view how the AI maturity of the organization is like, do you actually like, are you hiring and getting in the right resources that have experience to work with AI? And again, like I think that's getting a lot better. I mean, just even in like the last like year and a half, 2 years since like ChatGPT first came out, I mean the number of like AI centric job postings is absolutely blown up. At least from like what I've seen on like LinkedIn. Like it felt like before ChatGPT, especially for me as a product manager, I would see product manager postings, but I'd rarely see product manager postings that would literally say AI in the title. And now it feels like over half of the product manager posting, at least the ones that I see, they'll actually have the AI and ML in the title. So they're looking for that in particular. So I feel like again, the resourcing aspect and having the right skills there is getting to a good point with the AI maturity. Where I feel like a lot of companies and organizations are still lacking, especially the kind of like larger ones, is getting the organizational structure of the teams and how they work together and the kind of like day-to-day process aligned with an approach that will work well with designing AI products and developing and delivering them. As I mentioned earlier, we kind of touched on it, that ideally you want to work in a much more like iterative nature and like release like smaller iterations, collect user data, see where it's going, and then go from there. But that can be really tough, especially when you're dealing with like larger organizations as like a product manager or designer, when you're having to like execute on like 3 months, 6 months, or year-long roadmaps. You have to end up like pitching it to leadership, getting alignment. It's really hard to constantly just be like, well, we're actually gonna change our roadmap because we saw something in the data that we didn't like. So I feel like not every large organization is adept to operate the agile nature that I feel like is really AI products. I think as well, one thing I've noticed, especially a lot of larger companies, it can be a little bit convoluted how AI is like organized. Like I've seen like so many different approaches where there'll be like one team that's focused on like the infrastructure of AI and like another team that's focused on the experience. A lot of There's a lot of different teams working together we're trying to work together on delivering AI capabilities, and sometimes they end up like working in silos, and you just end up with like teams that like one team is like delivered something and then another team's delivering almost the exact same AI functionality, but you're just using it in a different part of the product in a slightly different way. And it's like, well, maybe we should have just developed it once and figure out a way to, vary it slightly for the two different areas of the product. So that's another thing I've noticed as well, that it can definitely be a little bit convoluted. And sometimes it can feel like there's like almost too many cooks in the kitchen sometimes when you're dealing with AI. You have to be able to figure out how to navigate this as well. So I think that part in particular, in regards to AI maturity, in my opinion, is currently still lacking the most.
Got it. So just coordination, it seems, between different teams in the company.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that will get better over time. I just think that it's probably like a consequence of teams just trying to get in the right AI talent and get in the AI
Right.
teams, and you're trying to ramp that up quickly. And I think over time that's going to obviously work itself out because especially in the tech industry right now, like companies are trying to be very like cost conscious and ensure that they're organized and have the teams in a manner that are the most effective. You're going to see that there's a lot of inefficiencies with the way the AI teams are structured, and that's probably just going to net out eventually in having a much better structure. But there'll definitely be some pain until that happens for sure.
Got it. Uh, you know, it's so good to hear that there are more jobs coming up, but it sounds like a lot of them are more AI focused on the product side. I personally haven't seen a ton of design jobs for AI. There have been some, but it's not that plentiful. Like, it doesn't seem like there would be additional AI design jobs out there that would help with the current situation. On that topic, I do want to bring in a question from a commenter. And we have an issue right now where LinkedIn Live is kind of broken, so I can't see any comments. I had to go into the event page itself to pull up a comment. And this one's from Nathan. So sorry, it looks a little bit janky, but I typed it in manually. With the rise of AI, do you see the roles of design and PM merging?
Hmm. That's an interesting question. I feel like even from what I've read on LinkedIn, it feels like it's a little bit like a polarizing question, especially if you ask anyone that currently works in product. Like obviously there's some example. I think it was like Airbnb recently made like a shift of, I believe that they kind of got rid of the traditional product management function, and now like they're more so having like product marketing managers. I'm not sure whether like they actually completely got rid of product managers or just added marketing to the scope. But I think that Airbnb is an example of a company that is going more so on that route of merging the marketing and the product aspects. Uh, to me, like I can see some value like in that, and like from my sort of working as a product manager, like, I've obviously had to work very closely with the marketing stakeholders, especially where we're getting close to launch and determine that we have the right go-to-market strategy. Um, I think it would just depend on the role though, because for me, like I feel like at least for my role working in like AI machine learning as a product manager, like I would feel very overwhelmed if I was responsible on an overall daily basis of the marketing piece of it. So I think you may see companies try and get more value out of the product manager position, but I don't know if every company is going to do that by trying to fold in marketing as well. It could vary per company. For example, I've seen a lot in the PM space recently, especially from my experience like interviewing and looking at roles in the AI machine learning space, is that they're really looking for product managers that are no longer generalists, but have a lot of background and understanding in AI machine learning products. So like, I noticed that even just interviewing over the summer, that there's kind of like a new interview step that I was having as a product manager that I never had before, where I usually meet a lot of time with the very senior, a senior like data scientist or applied scientist leader, and they have like grill me and ask me questions about like my understanding of working with AI and machine learning process. Sometimes you like ask me to like describe how like a certain like machine learning model works. Essentially trying to quiz like, do I actually have experience working machine learning? Do I actually understand it? And I think what they're looking for is they want a product manager that can be able to have like really in-depth, like intimate conversations with the engineering stakeholders and the science stakeholders on figuring out like how the product should work, how it should work from like the back end and getting more value from that product manager. I think they're no longer wanting um, that kind of generalist product managers like, well, I can work on any type of product and I just focus on like coming up with the right roadmap and the right prioritization. I think you're definitely seeing companies get away from that and they want product managers that at the very least are like very focused on delivering value and have experience in a niche area, whether it's AI machine learning, whether it's like payments, whether it's, I don't know, whether it's like security or something. I think they're really looking for that niche value. So again, like I think companies are looking for more value from the PM position. It could be through marketing. It could also be through like a deeper technical understanding in like a niche domain as well.
Is that the same expectation for designers when it comes to AI? Like, do you feel like when they're interviewing for designers to bring onto the team, the engineering leaders are grilling them as well to see if they understand how to work on machine learning or AI tools and they have experience in working with data scientists and very technical stuff?
That's a great question. It's a little bit hard for me to answer as I haven't been directly in the conversations to figure out exactly how, or even if a designer is interviewing with like a data or an engineering leader and they're asking those kind of questions. I can say from my perspective, when I have been on, when I have had like an interview step with a design candidate, like generally from my standpoint, I just want to assess if the person truly like is passionate about and cares about AI. Like that's all that from my standpoint as a product manager really care about. Like if you're passionate about AI, like you seem to like understand what's going on in the market, you use those tools. Like I feel as a designer, you'll be able to like put yourself in the shoes of those users and come up with a lot of like great designs for the AI product. So I haven't particularly asked those types of questions, but that doesn't say that in a certain interview that you may not encounter an engineering or a science leader that could.
Can you give us a preview of some of the questions that you might ask a designer in an interview to assess their compatibility with the team?
Yeah, like a probably just ask them like one question again, just with generically, I would just probably ask them to if they could kind of explain, their experience in the AI space just a little. Like even if they don't have experience, I'm probably just looking for like even if the person said like, yeah, like I was an early adopter of like Chat GPT, like I'm fascinated by these things, stuff like that. I'd probably ask one question, just kind of assess like where are they currently at? Have they worked in AI design already, or do they at the very least have a passion for AI and they use the tool? So that'd be one question I would look at asking. Um, Another question I probably ask as well is just like the other stakeholders that they work with, because when you're dealing with any type of like AI products, especially if it's more so like a conversational AI product, there's going to be more stakeholders. So you're going to always have data scientists are going to be a new stakeholder, but as well like there's going to be a lot of importance on the designer really partnering with someone who specializes and focuses on the content. And what I mean by like what's the actual language that the conversational AI tool is going to respond with. And the designer is going to have to, I think, really partner in collaboration with that stakeholder. So in particular, I would probably ask if they've had any experience working closely with content designers and kind of how that's been, because I would just want to get a sense of like, is this designer going to come in from day one and be able to work effectively with the content person and marrying the UI UX design with the actual content design of this conversational tool? Or is that something that they don't have experience in? That could be a little bit like a learning experience for them and they could encounter bumps in the road. So that's another question that I would ask just based on the uniqueness of designers, in particular if they're focusing on a conversational AI tool.
Got it. That makes sense. So, what are what are you hoping to hear from a designer when you ask that kind of question? Like, most designers have played with ChatGPT already. They've, went through all the different versions. They've probably played with Midjourney. What would help a designer stick out to you? Is it about whether they've used some kind of more esoteric or more technical tool, or is it them going further and further into, say, ChatGPT?
I mean, to be honest with you, what would impress me the most when asking that question is just how, like, I would be really impressed with someone who had like really strong opinions. Like, if someone to be like, yeah, like, I use ChatGPT a lot, but I really don't like this experience. So I think, like, like I'm surprised that they haven't designed for this use case like this. Like, maybe a designer would argue with, the way that ChatGPT, like, it handles like every single new conversational thread that you start as like a completely different, like you have to like select it
Yeah.
from that tab menu. Maybe they disagree with that, like throw it all in one. Like, I would just be looking for a designer that truly, throwing out like a really bold opinion would show me that the designer is really passionate about the space. It would also allow me to get a sense of like some of their like ideation and some ideas that they could have on the overall like UI UX experience. Or maybe they would just comment on, like, oh yeah, I prefer the Claude AI tool over the ChatGPT tool because like I love this part of like the overall UI UX. Or maybe they say something, like, oh, like I love the trend of kind of like marrying search with chat that Perplexity AI is doing, something like that. Like those type of comments would really stick out to me because they would kind of kill two birds with one stone. Would reinforce that, okay, this person truly is passionate about AI, and they, like they are a consumer of AI and they use the tools. But it would also give me like a high level sense of their like thought process and their ideation, and maybe like I'd be wow. I wouldn't care if I disagreed. Like I wouldn't be afraid. Like if someone says something bold and I disagree with it, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just opinions. And even as a product manager, like I disagree with designers on things, and a lot of times we'll end up doing what the designer wants, so we'll collaborate on it. So I'm not concerned about disagreement. I'm just looking for like bold opinions that show passion and give me an example of your ideation.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. I really appreciate that because so many times the interviewer expects you to have the same opinions they do. Otherwise, you're wrong and you don't get the job. But, I want to ask this question, and it's really from the lens of designers who are working in companies that want to adopt AI features and tools, but haven't done so because they don't have a good idea yet. Uh, have you had to pitch new features involving AI to leadership before? And if you have, what was the process like for you?
Yeah, I have. The problem definitely be interesting. Um, it can be kind of a tricky situation because anytime you're trying to pitch AI to leadership, like you definitely want to kind of paint, the picture like what the ideal state would be in the future and all value that AI could provide. And I think to really for someone's pitch AI product is probably going to get like a lot more excitement than someone, pitching that we're changing like our like login flow. Like it's obviously going to a lot more excitement and interest from leadership. There's also kind of a balance of when you're pitching those, also making sure that the stakeholders understand like the risks involved, and also like the resource commitment that needs to be made. It's especially with what you're seeing right now. When companies are trying to especially integrate like generative AI, like large language models, there's not only a lot of cost in terms of the resources required to actually like implement that, but there's also like really high cost in terms of just like running those large language models. Like if you are like using like OpenAI's GPT 3.5 large language model or GPT-4, you have to pay like OpenAI like every single time the model's called if you're using one of their foundational models. So that's another aspect of it as well, is that you have massive infrastructure costs, massive resource costs. There's a lot of uncertainty. So I think when you're pitching it to leadership, it's really important to make sure that they understand some of the risks and trying to pitch to leadership like, okay, well, like this is what we need, and this is like what we like. This is what we feel like we need in terms of like resources and organizational structure and timeline to be able to actually execute on this vision. Because if you sell to leadership, if we're going to introduce this new conversational AI tool and it's going to introduce like $100 million of value, it very well could, but it's not going to introduce $100 million of value in the first iteration. It's not going to introduce $100 million of value in the second iteration. It's going to be several iterations down the road. And you need to make sure that you can get leadership excited about that end state, but allow them to understand the difficulty of the road that's going to be and make sure that you can get their buy-in on that journey and the patience. Otherwise, you're going to have leadership extremely keen and you're going to launch the first iteration and it's going to be like a massive failure in terms of like what you had pitched as your kind of end state. And if you don't have that expectation set, the early buy-in, leadership could just like completely kill your project and be like, well, like this is a waste of money. We don't want to waste more money. So there's a lot that you have to kind of tiptoe there.
That's really informative. I really liked your answer because you're looking at it in such a holistic way, whereas most people would just be talking about the end state or like the first MVP version, and it just kind of stops there. And AI doesn't really work in either way. You kind of have to look at the short term and the long term together.
Yeah,
What
absolutely.
do you feel like if you were a designer and you were to pitch for something like this, how would you focus it beyond just the cost and the value created? Do you think there's more of maybe a new user interaction or some kind of a new method to engage for the users or the customers to engage with the product when it comes to AI? And have you seen that done successfully in the past?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as a designer, like I would really try and focus on again like the actual pain points that you're solving for the user and the value that you're delivering. So if it is a new interaction pattern, like why is it better for the users? Like what pain points in the existing interaction pattern is this new interaction pattern solving? And to kind of like expand, like you asked, some examples I've seen. What I'm seeing a lot in the tech market right now in terms of like AI capabilities is initially you saw a lot of companies that a handful of years ago when like AI and like chatbots and stuff started gaining popularity, you see like a lot of tech companies that would just throw like a chat panel into the bottom right of their product and users could invoke it and have a conversation with
Yeah.
this. But now you're seeing this really interesting design pattern. I think a lot of people have like realized that they're kind of missing the mark with that because truly like just throwing a chatbot into the bottom right experience isn't necessarily inherently solving for pain points in the core UI UX. It's almost like I think I've worked on even like chatbot products where it's like you're trying to like replicate the same functionality as the core product. And it's like why? Like why is like is it truly a significantly better experience for the user to do this in via chatbot versus the core functionality? And even if it was, it needs to be significantly better. And you need to have like a long-term vision then of like funneling the user from the core UI UX into the chatbot. I think you're seeing a lot of companies that did that and they realize, okay, like we're just not actually solving the pain points of the core UI UX. And you're seeing this kind of like a marriage between like search and like conversational chat now. So I'm not sure if anyone saw this last week. Amazon like announced the launch of their Rufus AI. It's really interesting. So it's an AI assistant, but it's heavily integrated with Amazon Search. And it's kind of like an experience that users can easily like invoke and dismiss. So it doesn't like completely take over, and it's not meant to like supplant existing Amazon Search UI UX. It's actually supposed to be supplemental to it. So Amazon didn't take the approach like, well, how do we help users do their entire shopping experience through chat? They looked at it from the lens of like, what are some of the pain points that users have when they're searching for a product from our core UI UX? And how can we make an assistant that just focuses on addressing the pain points versus trying to recreate the same experiences from the core UI UX in the assistant? And it's a really cool experience. I'd encourage everyone to, I think it's just in beta now, so you may not be able to see it. I'm not in the beta, I can see it in the app, but there's like there's some videos online, but you can type something in like the search bar and then you can flick up the panel and like Rufus AI will come up and it'll have context of what you're searching for. So for example, you could ask something really vague, like help me find a birthday gift for my mom. That's not going to be a great search query on Amazon because you're just going to probably get like a ton of different items, but that could seem really overwhelming to you as a shopper, and it doesn't really help you get a sense of like, well, like what would be a good birthday gift for my mom? Like what would she truly like? You're just gonna see a bunch of items and you got to figure out from there. Where as a user, if you invoke this Rufus AI, it will take context of your search, find a birthday gift for my mom, and then it would actually like recommend some high level product categories, maybe recommend like jewelry, flowers, and it'll give you like a brief description of like why this is such a great birthday gift idea for a mom. And then as a user, you can like drill down further. So it's kind of a really unique UI UX paradigm, and I'm really excited about it. I'm excited to like work with it. I think it could be a really great experience for end users.
Got it. That's really cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to apologize to all the viewers today. Unfortunately, I can't see your comments or your questions very easily. LinkedIn Live is a little bit janky as per usual. So I feel like I'm dominating the conversation again, but we're at time right now. Casey, do you have anything to plug? Anything that people should, where can they find you? Where can they read your writing if you have any?
Yeah, everyone can find me on LinkedIn. Usually, if I have any like thoughts or anything to post, I usually post it directly on LinkedIn. I used to do some posting on Medium years ago, and then I just kind of got a little bit too busy with work as my career kind of grew. So I don't really post on Medium anymore. But if I have any relevant thoughts, I always post them on LinkedIn.
Got it. Cool. Thank you so much for taking the time today. You've been so generous with it. And I've learned a lot personally about how PMs work with designers, how you view design, and how we can better work together and collaborate. That's really cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope that everyone on the call got some good, useful insights.
Sure, they did. Thank you again. And have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care.